Another day, another story. From state-sponsored privateers to outright outlaws, these pirates made their reputations as fearsome raiders. The Barbarossa Brothers. Welcome to Tabo Eminem Channel. Sailing from North Africa's Barbary coast, the Barbarossa, which means red beard in Italian, brothers Arouge and Hizir became rich by capturing European vessels in the Mediterranean Sea. Though their most lucrative early victims included 2 papal galleys and a Sardinian warship, they began targeting the Spanish around the time Arouge lost an arm to them in battle. By 1516, the Ottoman Sultan had essentially put Arouge in charge of the entire Barbary coast, a position that Hizir took over 2 years later following his brother's death. Hizir, otherwise known as Khair ed-Din, then spent the rest of his days fighting various Christian enemies, including a Holy League fleet specifically formed by the Pope to destroy him. Sir Francis Drake. Francis Drake, nicknamed My Pirate by Queen Elizabeth I, was among the so-called Sea Dog privateers licensed by the English government to attack Spanish shipping. Drake sailed on his most famous voyage from 1577 to 1580, becoming the first English captain to circumnavigate the globe. On that same trip, he lost 4 of his 5 boats, executed a subordinate for allegedly plotting a mutiny, raided various Spanish ports and captured a Spanish vessel loaded with treasure. A delighted Queen Elizabeth immediately knighted him upon his return. 8 years later, Drake helped defeat the Spanish Armada. L'Ollonais. L'Ollonais was one of many buccaneers, a cross between state-sponsored privateers and outright outlaws, who plied the Caribbean Sea in the mid to late 1600s. Also known as Jean David Now, L'Ollonais is believed to have begun raiding Spanish ships and coastal settlements, and cultivating a reputation for excessive cruelty, soon after arriving in the Caribbean as an indentured servant. 17th-century pirate historian Alexander Excomalon wrote that L'Ollonais would hack his victims to pieces bit by bit, or squeeze a cord around their necks until their eyes popped out. Suspecting he had been betrayed, L'Ollonais supposedly once even cut out a man's heart and took a bite. Karma came back to haunt him in 1668, however, when, according to Excomalon, he was captured and eaten by cannibals. Henry Morgan. Perhaps the best-known pirate of the buccaneering era, Henry Morgan once purportedly ordered his men to lock the inhabitants of Puerto Principe, Cuba, inside a church so that they could plunder the town unhindered. He then moved on to capture Portobello, Panama, in part by creating a human shield out of priests, women and the mayor. Over the next few years, other brutal raids followed against 2 towns in Venezuela and Panama City. Though Morgan was briefly arrested in 1672, he ended up serving as acting governor of Jamaica in 1678, and again from 1680 to 1682. Ironically, the Jamaican legislature passed an anti-piracy law during his administration, and Morgan even assisted in pirate prosecution. Captain Kidd. Once a respected privateer, Captain William Kidd set sail in 1696 with the assignment of hunting down pirates in the Indian Ocean. But he soon turned pirate himself, capturing vessels such as the Quaker Merchant and killing a subordinate with a wooden bucket. A massive defection left him with a skeleton crew for the journey home, which included a stop at New York's Gardiner's Island to bury treasure. Having run afoul of the powerful British East India Company, Kidd was arrested before making it back to England. He was then tried and executed, and his decaying body was displayed from the banks of the River Thames as a warning to other pirates. Blackbeard. Born Edward Teach, Blackbeard intimidated enemies by coiling smoking fuses into his long, braided facial hair, and by slinging multiple pistols and daggers across his chest. In November 1717 he captured a French slave ship, later renamed the Queen Anne's Revenge, and refitted it with 40 guns. With that extra firepower, he then blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, until the town's residents met his demands for a large chest of medicine. After laying low for a few months in North Carolina, Blackbeard was killed in battle with the British Navy. Legend holds that he received 20 stab wounds and 5 gunshot wounds before finally succumbing. The so-called Golden Age of Piracy, of which Blackbeard was a major part, would only last a few more years. But countless books, plays and movies from Treasure Island to Pirates of the Caribbean would later bring a romanticized version of that era squarely into the public eye. Calico Jack. John Rackham, better known as Calico Jack, received a pardon for previous piracy acts in 1719. Nonetheless, he headed back out to sea the following year after seizing a 12-gun sloop from Nassau Harbor in the Bahamas. Among Rackham's dozen or so followers were 2 of the only women pirates ever to ply Caribbean waters. One, Anne Bonny, had left her husband to be with Rackham, while the other, Mary Read, had purportedly been sailing for quite some time disguised in men's clothing. In October 1720, a pirate hunting boat overtook Rackham's drunken band. Only Bonny, Read and perhaps one man are believed to have offered any resistance. Though Rackham was executed the following month, his female crewmates escaped the hangman's noose because both were found to be pregnant. Read died in prison soon after, and no one knows what became of Bonny. Madame Cheng. In 1805, Madame Cheng's husband, Cheng Yi, formed what quickly became the largest pirate confederation in history. Upon his death 2 years later, Madame Cheng took over the business and expanded it even further, commanding an estimated 1,800 ships and 70,000 men at the height of her powers. With the help of Chung Po Sai, the adopted son of her husband and also her lover, she demanded protection money from coastal communities, attacked ships in the South China Sea, and once even kidnapped 7 British sailors. Madame Cheng then took a pardon in 1810 when Chinese authorities began cracking down on piracy. A prostitute in her youth, she lived out her golden years running a large opium smuggling operation. Piracy has a long and colorful history, with many infamous pirates gaining notoriety for their exploits on the high seas. Here are 8 famous pirates from history. Blackbeard, Edward Teach or Thatch. 1. Blackbeard was one of the most feared pirates of the Golden Age of Piracy in the early 18th century. 1. He operated in the West Indies and along the eastern coast of the American colonies. 1. Known for his long black beard and intimidating appearance, Blackbeard often tied slow-burning fuses into his beard, creating a fearsome image. Captain Kidd, William Kidd. 1. Originally a privateer, a legal pirate authorized by a government, Kidd turned to piracy and became one of the most well-known pirates of the 17th century. 1. He was eventually captured and tried for piracy and murder, leading to his execution in 1701. Anne Bonny and Mary Read. 1. Anne Bonny and Mary Read were 2 notorious female pirates who operated in the Caribbean during the early 18th century. 1. They disguised themselves as men and fought alongside other pirates. 1. Both women were eventually captured, but their stories have become legendary in pirate lore. Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart. 1. Roberts was a Welsh pirate who captured over 400 ships during his career in the early 18th century. 1. Known for his boldness and success, he was considered one of the most successful pirates of the Golden Age of Piracy, until his death in battle in 1722. Calico Jack, Jack Rackham. 1. Calico Jack was an English pirate captain known for his distinctive calico clothing. 1. He operated in the West Indies during the early 18th century, and was responsible for popularizing the Jolly Roger flag. 1. His crew included Anne Bonny and Mary Read. Henry Morgan. 1. Captain Henry Morgan was a Welsh privateer who later turned pirate in the late 17th century. 1. He was one of the most successful pirates of his time, raiding Spanish settlements and accumulating great wealth. 1. Morgan was eventually knighted and became the Lieutenant Governor of Jamaica. William Captain Kidd. 1. Not to be confused with the aforementioned Captain Kidd, William Kidd was a Scottish pirate who operated in the Indian Ocean and the Red Sea during the late 17th century. 1. He was known for his intelligence and cunning, but his career ended when he was captured and executed in 1701. Ching Shih. 1. Ching Shih was a Chinese pirate who terrorized the South China Sea during the early 19th century. 1. She commanded a fleet that consisted of hundreds of ships and tens of thousands of pirates. 1. After surrendering to the Chinese government, she negotiated a pardon for herself and her crew, ultimately retiring with her ill-gotten gains. Blackbeard, Edward Teach or Thatch. Blackbeard, whose real name was likely Edward Teach or Thatch, was a notorious English pirate who operated around the West Indies and along the eastern coast of the American colonies during the early 18th century. His fearsome appearance, with a long black beard and slow-burning fuses woven into his beard, created a terrifying image that struck fear into his enemies. Blackbeard's flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a former French slave ship that he captured and equipped with 40 guns. He blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, in 1718, demanding medicine in exchange for the release of prisoners. This event, known as the Blockade of Charleston, added to his reputation as a formidable and ruthless pirate. In November 1718, a naval expedition led by Lieutenant Robert Maynard confronted Blackbeard off the coast of North Carolina. After a fierce battle, Blackbeard was killed, and his head was hung from the bowsprit of Maynard's ship as a warning to other pirates. Blackbeard's demise marked the end of his brief but infamous pirate career. Ching Shih. Ching Shih, often referred to as the Pirate Queen of the South China Sea, was a Chinese pirate who terrorized the waters during the early 19th century. Originally a prostitute, she married Cheng Ai, a notorious pirate, and together they formed a powerful pirate coalition known as the Red Flag Fleet. After Cheng Ai's death in 1807, Ching Shih took command of the Red Flag Fleet, which consisted of hundreds of junks and tens of thousands of pirates. She established a strict code of laws for her fleet, with severe punishments for disobedience or betrayal. Ching Shih's leadership and strategic acumen allowed her to amass considerable wealth and power, making her one of the most successful pirates in history. Facing pressure from the Chinese and British navies, Ching Shih decided to negotiate a pardon for herself and her crew. In 1810, she retired from piracy, and the Chinese government granted her amnesty. Ching Shih's story is unique not only for her success as a pirate but also for her ability to transition from a life of crime to one of legitimacy. These pirates played significant roles in shaping the popular image of piracy and have left a lasting legacy in maritime history. Thanks for watching. Request you to subscribe the channel.